Hey friends, this is Carter and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the talk show. I'm going to call it a talk show for this episode because I always say the podcast, the talk show, where I bring on other writers and we get to have a conversation about the craft, the process, our individual journeys. Not so much discussion about any particular book of ours, but it's more kind of an inside baseball for other writers. So I get feedback from other writers saying they appreciate kind of hearing about the struggles because there's nothing about writing if not struggle. So struggles persist regardless of your level of success, however you want to define success, but they never go away. And that's a good thing because it's the struggle, I think, that keeps us honest, that keeps us grounded, and it also keeps us reaching. So struggle is what stops a lot of writers, and rejection stops a lot of writers. And I would contend that you're not a writer, at least not a writer who wants to see their work flourish in the world, unless you can accept that struggle. So it's part of the process, and a very major one. And I know years and years and years of struggle for me have helped me get to more and more successful places. So anyway, that is my soapbox for the moment. But I will say that a lot of the psychology of writing is stuff that I'm really interested in and that I coach and that I teach. So if you're interested in that kind of a thing, check out my website, unboundwriter.com, and you can learn about my online writing courses, of which one is called The Writer's Psychology, my one-on-one coaching, and my in-person retreats and workshops. So today on the show, I had the wonderful Pamela Statz. Now, Pam, has written a lovely book called Thorn City. It's her debut novel. Came out in May of 2024. I saw Pam at the debut writers breakfast at Thriller Fest in 2024. Every writer is given a minute to talk about their debut novel, and I don't know, she was interesting, and what she was saying about her book kind of resonated with me, and I went up to her and said, I'd love to have you on the show sometime. And 6 months later, we made it work. So she lives in Portland and has been there for about 12 years, and this is where Thorn City takes place. But Pam's journey was really interesting to listen to because she comes from, at least her mother was a voracious reader, and Pam's life was surrounded by books, it sounds like. Went to journalism school, but then kind of went in some slightly different directions in the tech industry. After that, back in Portland, she decides, I really want to write a novel, and ended up taking a class called, I think it was How to Write a Novel in 8 weeks, a class that she's taken 4 times. And that's been the motivation and the inspiration and the accountability she needed to get Thorn City published, which, she published her first book that she wrote, which is pretty amazing. Not many people can say that. I certainly can't say that. And she's just continuously in this space of learning and absorbing and trying and failing and trying and succeeding, so she's doing all the things published writers do. And then she's working on her sequel to Thorn City as well. So fascinating conversation. I think there's a lot of wisdom in this episode. So if you're an aspiring writer, I think it's going to be a good listen for you. So I hope you enjoy this. This is my conversation with Pamela Statz. Good. Am I calling you Pam? Am I calling you Pamela?
Pam
What's
is good.
the writer's name? Pam?
Yep.
But it's Pamela for the books because it's got to sound.
It sounds a little bit more fancy. But yeah,
What
Pam's easier.
Where are you? Where do you live?
In Portland, Oregon.
Oh,
That
that's
was my
right.
dog. My dog might try to break into my office, and he's trying to get in right now.
What kind of dog do you have?
He is a gigantic golden doodle.
Oh.
He's 105 pounds.
Oh God,
So you
no.
can't really keep him
I've got
out. anything.
2-year-old regular golden, and she's 60, so 60 pounds, so it's much more manageable than nearly double that.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so I'm in Portland, Oregon. I've lived here for about 12 years, and yeah, it's a delightful town. I really, really.
Yeah, there's a kinship, I think. I'm in Boulder, Colorado.
Oh, right on. Mhm.
So a little bit to the east. I'm in Boulder County, but there's a lot of crossover, culturally, politically, all sorts of different types of
Mhm.
things. So my partner and I have talked about Oregon, the idea of kind of moving there at some point. But
Uh-huh.
do you like it? You happy?
I love it. Yeah, I lived in, well, I grew up in Wisconsin and then moved to San Francisco and worked in tech, Wired, and Lucasfilm, and a bunch of different companies. And I loved San Francisco up to a point, but it just kept getting more and more, kind of
Mhm.
expensive and hard to live there and more crowded. And so we moved to Portland, and it was like the 90s. I still miss the 90s. Just like Portlandia says.
Yeah, totally.
Um, and I love it because it's super dog friendly. There are so many movie theaters, and every
Yeah.
single neighborhood has a delightful movie theater, which is,
Oh,
just wonderful. My
that
husband
is
and
very
I are
90s.
really into films. Yeah. And yeah, the food scene is fantastic. People are really friendly and really creative. And
Yeah.
it has a really amazing sort of book, culture around writing and
Hmm.
appreciating books, from Powell's books to
Yeah.
literary arts. Yeah, there's
Powell's
so many
is Powell's
opportunities.
the largest independent bookstore in the country?
I believe that it is. It is
Yeah.
gigantic. If
Yeah.
have you been?
Yeah, I have. It's been years and
Yeah.
years and years. I've only been to Portland a couple times, but yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's 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 the size. It's not a Walmart, but it's the size of a Walmart, if not larger,
It's yeah,
with
it's
books.
6 stories. It takes up a whole city block. It's really
Yeah,
wonderful to visit. So,
yeah, that's awesome.
mhm.
So, so you've obviously spent a lot of your adulthood um, in that creative space, in that writing space. Now, when you were growing up in Wisconsin, and my daughter very well may end up going to Wisconsin Law.
Oh,
Um,
nice. In
so
Madison.
Madison, yeah, and we went visited there when she was looking at undergrad, and she ended up at Michigan State. But it's an awesome campus and a great city,
Mhm.
obviously. So when you're growing up in Wisconsin, were you showing creative flourishes?
Yeah, and books were really important to, to the way I grew up, and my mom just filled the house with books. We
Oh,
always had so many things to read. Um,
and your
and
parent, what, was she just a casual? Like she liked to read, but that was just for pleasure.
yeah, just for pleasure. She wasn't a writer or anything. I grew
Yeah,
up on a dairy farm, and so just in her spare time, she read all the time, anytime she had an opportunity, which
great,
was tough with, all the work that had to be done, but
great.
she made it a priority and made it very available to us and encouraged us to read.
Hmm,
There was never a moment where
right,
she was like, "You need to go outside because,
right.
it's fine. Hide in your room and read." Totally support that. She was very, very pro book. And I did some writing. I ended up going to journalism school at UW Madison.
Mhm.
So I did have a lot of experience in sort of that newspaper reporting. But then when I moved to San Francisco, I was hired at Wired, but more on the production side of things, like keeping the trains running on time. And I worked on the website of Wired's website for about 7 years, spread out over like almost 2 decades.
That's a
But
big
yeah, I
job.
worked.
Wired's website.
Yeah, yeah, it was very exciting, super fun time. I worked there in the mid 90s and then again in the mid 2000s.
Mhm.
And it had changed quite a bit, but it was a really fun place to work. So I'd always been kind of surrounded by writers and writing and interpreting stories for a digital platform was really, what my career was about. And but then I moved to Portland and I needed a creative outlook. And so not an outlet. I mean, so I found this fantastic class called How to Write a Novel in 8 Weeks,
Mhm.
taught by writer Emily Chenoweth.
Mhm.
And that is when I first started writing fiction, like more seriously.
What was, but that's not to gloss over because that was a bit of a, that's a big leap. It doesn't
Hmm.
sound like a big leap, but just the mere fact of like, I've got a professional career, I'm not 17 anymore. I've got what I think is a path. I'm
Hmm.
going to take a class. Um, like very few people do that. So you obviously have had some kind of like something that had been nudging at you for years,
Yeah.
probably.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I've always kept lists and notes about funny things that I've heard people say or crazy situations that people found themselves in, and always thought like, oh, this collection of things could potentially become, a novel or a series of short stories.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what is in my book, Thorn City,
Hmm.
it's a collection of conversations with a lot of people that I've known over the last, 20, 25 years. Um, and so it was just something I wanted, to pursue, but until I took the class, I didn't really have a skill set for putting that into a fictional, sort of format. So Emily's class I thought was really helpful because her goal is to like write as fast as you can, don't edit in the moment, don't do research, just
100%.
write, 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 and then go back, add more layers of detail, delete what you have to, worry about it then. But her sort of method and her teaching was really what allowed me to turn all of these different ideas into an actual 94,000 word novel.
Wow.
It did
Yeah,
take a long time. I
of
was
course.
working on it for about 8 years. I took her class 4 times over 8 years. So,
Yeah, and I'm always fascinated by that point in somebody's life where because we all have these thoughts, constant thoughts. I might
mhm,
think like I hear a song that I love and I'm like, God, I would love to write a song, and knowing that I don't really have the talent for it, but what would it take for me to then take a class and really commit to it? And I think that's why so many people have ideas for a book and so few people write anything
mhm,
is that what is that moment that crystallizes that gets you to commit because it's so hard for any of us to commit to anything, right? Because it's
mhm.
effort and it's
Yeah.
making ourselves vulnerable and scared and what if we suck. um so like I'm always fascinated like so you just decided like and again it doesn't sound like a big deal but I do think it is like I'm going to take this class and then you take it 4 times because it sounds like you need like we all need that constant like I know what she's going to say but the
Uh-huh.
positive reinforcement is necessary for my momentum to carry through. Was it
Yeah.
something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, if I were to stop writing now, Emily would scold me
Right,
as
right,
well. She
right. You have
should.
somebody
So
you're
I
like
also have
being
this kind of
accountable
fear at
for.
this point. Like, I want to make sure, I want Emily to be happy. I need
Right.
to write. I need to
But
feed the
that's
beast.
important too, having some kind of
A
accountability
little bit of
partner.
pressure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And deadlines. And then
Yeah.
also, she always likes to say you're putting a little bit of skin in the game. You're because her classes cost money, so
Right.
I
Right.
spend a certain amount of money, and I'm like, I'm very into using up everything. I'm a member of the clean plate club, shall we say?
Yeah.
So if I'm going to pay for something, I'm going to get everything out of it that I can.
Yeah.
So that also is a big motivating factor for me. Is just
Yeah, and I think that's important because I do writing coaching and if somebody spends a couple $1,000s to get an
mhm,
opinion of their manuscript and maybe a lot of that opinion is critical because that's the nature of of a
mhm,
critique. It's in the name. Um I have such respect for that because how cool is it that you're so invested that this is not going to be an easy editorial letter to read and to discuss,
mhm.
but
Yeah.
you are like letting yourself go and willing to learn. I mean, because anyone who's published has been through that in one facet or another. And that's also what stops a lot of people, right? Is like the first time
Yeah.
they show something, if they show something at all, because that's another big stopper, but they show
Mhm.
something and then they get kind of this negative feedback and they shut down. And you'll never be a writer. You'll never be a published writer if that's your, if that's your reaction to that.
Yeah. So I found, the first class that I took, fortunately, it was with this delightful group of people, and we were all starting out. Like no one really knew what they were doing. And as the weeks went on, as the class went on, everybody just improved so much. It was really astonishing to
Huh.
watch. My
Yeah.
writing got so much better, and everyone else's did too. And so to me, it was this really important lesson to understand that it's okay to throw yourself, to make yourself vulnerable, to share your work. And if people don't like it, who cares? Make it
Right.
better and, keep going. I mean, it is hard to get that criticism, and it's hard to do that. But if you're taking a class and you're with a supportive group of people, they're all experiencing the same thing.
Right.
And
Right.
the more you do it, the more comfortable you are. Like, oh, I don't, I'm going to share this, this set of 10 pages. It might be absolutely terrible, but at least I'm going to learn something about how to make it better, and how to
Right.
make the story progress better, and so on. So,
And it
yeah,
takes, and it
it's
takes
hard, but
right. And it takes a special kind of ego, I think, because you have to have enough ego to let yourself go and to be like, this is a learning experience and I'm excited for that. But if you have too fragile of an ego, it's just going to destroy you. And if you have too much of an ego, then you're not going to listen to anybody.
yeah.
So, so
Uh-huh.
it's a balance. And I think for most writers, and I guess this is from my perspective only, but I'm guessing is you tend to most writers lean towards having not enough ego, I think, because imposter syndrome, I don't belong here. Of course you didn't like my manuscript because I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, I went through years and years and years of that. And then you hopefully get to a place where you're like, all right, I'm good and I can always learn, but I'm good enough where I know how to plow forward. Because it can just be because people ask, and I'm sure they ask you too. I'm sure you had rejections
Hmm.
with
Many,
that manuscript, right?
many, many.
How do you, how do you, survive that? And of course, in your case, the book gets published, which is, kind of rare, right? This is your first novel, and somebody
Mhm.
bought it. That's pretty amazing. But you probably had rejections along the way. You were saying,
Yeah, I tried to, I was focused on doing the traditional publishing route, and I looked for an agent. I sent this manuscript to, I'd say, 150 agents. I had
totally.
a few, like one asked to read the entire book, another one, a few chapters here and there, another one, a few chapters here and there. And I got rejections just across the board. So I had also
Months
submitted
later, probably.
so I'd submitted it to publishers who didn't require writers with agents. So like Ooligan, they only publish books by debut writers in the Pacific Northwest who don't have agents, and that was me. And the story that I
What
wrote
a
also,
niche market.
I know, right? And they only do 4 books, I think like 4 books a year, and it's a
Oh, wow.
variety of
Oh, that's
fiction,
fantastic. God,
fiction.
I
Yeah.
love that's so great.
Mhm. It's actually a graduate school program. So it's an independent press, but it's through Portland State University.
Hmm.
And so the press is completely run by graduate students. So it's a great learning
That's amazing.
opportunity for me as a writer, and for them as students to have a variety of types of books to work on. And they do everything from the developmental edit to copy edit to publicity and marketing. So yeah, they
That's
work
great. That's
fantastic.
great. And that's very selective. If you're only doing 4 books a year, and it's hard to plan for more than a couple of years, I would think,
Mhm.
for a publisher, um, that those are long odds. So congratulations that
Yeah,
it
I think so. Literally, I was ready to self-publish, and
yeah,
I think about 2 weeks before I was going to, I got an email from them asking,
yeah.
if it was still available, and I was like, yes, it is.
So
So,
walk me through that a little bit because I
mhm,
know, some of the listeners on this show are kind of at that space, right?
mhm.
And what is your mindset when you have a lot of rejections and you have a manuscript that you obviously think needs to be out in the world because you're pursuing this. At what point, and I bring this up because I've never self-published, and I think there's some tremendous self-publishing avenues that are the right decision. Just
Uh-huh.
it wasn't what I wanted to do, but the result of that was 3 books that never went anywhere, even though they were agented. Um, and I was okay with that. But what is that mindset of like, what do I do? Do I self-publish or do I just let it go? And the idea of letting it go is pretty tough.
Mhm. Yeah, I wasn't going to just let it go. Absolutely. I had it was completed and I hired an editor to do a developmental edit before I
Right? You had
submitted.
skin in the game.
I did. I spent some money on this. I had
Mhm.
taken all these classes and I was like, what the heck? I'm going to try to get this out into the world. And so I did all the research and how to self-publish. And fortunately, my background in media and technology
It all
is
lend itself.
incredibly helpful
Yeah,
because I know how to lay out a page. I can design a cover. There's so many things that I can do myself
right.
that, in addition to writing the entire book. So for me, it wasn't intimidating to try to self-publish. I know I wouldn't have sold very nearly as many copies through self-publishing as
Right.
through, with Hooligan Press, but
Yeah.
I wanted, I completed this creative project. It was one of the first projects that I actually finished that
Yeah.
wasn't related to a job.
Right. Right.
So
Right. Totally
no matter
self-guided.
what, it was going to get out there soon
Yeah.
in some form or another.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that interesting too? Just how we treat these things. And so I'm not usually under contract. I've had the same publisher for the last 6 books, but I've only done a 2-book deal once. And so normally it's just like I write whatever I feel like writing and just hope somebody
Hmm.
wants to buy it. You just don't know. But the fact that we're so self-guided and self-directed and self-accountable, but then I still make sure I'm imposing deadlines. I want to have
Uh-huh.
this done by this, and it is necessary, right, to treat it like it was a job that we are responsible to somebody else.
Yeah.
Kind of like your writing coach feeling like
Hmm.
kind of accountable to her. Is that how you feel when you approach kind of your own pleasurable writing? Is just like, because I think also when you just treat it whimsically, shit doesn't get done. you know
Yeah. I
so is that how
need,
you think about it a little bit? You're like, this is a job.
yeah, I wish I did that a little bit more these days.
Yeah, I
But
hear you.
I have been taking, I fortunately I was able to take a so classes with Emily. She has a novel writing intensive that I've taken. I'll have the third class starting up in January. So I know I
Okay.
have to have 50 pages that are really good. So that's my terrifying deadline right now.
Yeah,
And I've already,
that's good.
already have like 100 pages that I've submitted for previous classes. So I'm getting to the point where I'm writing the second book of Thorn City, and I'm writing the chapters that I don't really want to write because I have to write them now because
Right.
for her class, which is a great motivating and like I'm, it's
Totally.
it's very motivating for me to know that I'm going to have to share these pages with writers that I respect and Emily in particular. So that's a big motivating factor, but
Yeah.
I'm still not writing as much as I should.
So
I,
Thorn City is a series then, or is going to
well,
be a
yeah, I'll write a second one and then maybe end it at that point, but
okay.
there's
And
one
when
more book.
and
Mhm.
when you started that book, what came first? Was it the idea or was it the inspiration through the class saying like, I'm
Mhm.
just so excited to write now, I've got to write. And what's the idea?
So I had this whole list of characters that I had started to write bios for. And I took this first, write a novel in 8 weeks class and needed something to write about. And so I picked and chose, from that list of characters and figured, all right, somehow I'm going to make these people create a story around these personalities that I'd started to obsess over. And that is how the book kind of got started.
And that's always interesting too, because you know, I guess the conventional wisdom or the cliche is that I have an idea for a story, not I have an idea of characters and I have no idea what the story is, but
Uh-huh.
I love these characters, and that's pretty engaging.
Yeah, so characters in Portland getting up to all sorts of mischief. Terrible things happen to them.
Does
I'm
it
just
feel
so awful to them.
does it feel weird? Not weird. That's not the right word. So
Mhm.
I typically don't write what I know, because I almost feel like that's expected of me, and somehow mentally I push against that.
Uh-huh.
Um, but then when you do write about something you know really well, how does that expose you to
Mhm.
analysis? People saying like, "Oh my God, this sounds just like you," which is the other thing I don't really like about my. I don't like when people tell me that about my characters. And again, that's just my idiosyncrasy about that.
Mhm.
Um, but writing where you're from or where you live, I'm sure
Mhm.
you had a lot of feedback on. Did you get it right? Did you not get it right? That kind of a thing.
Yeah, well, writing about Portland, I've lived here for about 12 years,
Hmm.
and I did spend a lot of the incidents that happen in the book happened to me, like rushing a friend to Good Samaritan Hospital in the middle of the night because she'd
Hmm.
hit her head and needed some stitches. So
Right.
sitting in, this waiting room at the hospital for hours waiting for her to get treated was something that I'm like, oh, you know what? I think I should put this in the book. Something like this should happen.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
she knew I was writing, and I asked her, "Oh, can I come into the your exam room?" So I got a chance to go back in the exam room and meet the doctor and sort of have all these interactions. And I figured, oh, this would be a great opportunity to write
Oh,
about.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of those types of things happened. Um, and for instance, one of my main character, Lisa, she was um, Lisa and Jamie and Patrick, their experiences at the Lost Lake Academy, which is a fictional school for troubled teens. Their characters came out of a conversation that I had with a new friend that I made when I first moved to Portland. And we were just sharing our background stories. And I was like, oh, my background's so interesting. I grew up on a dairy farm and I have, I'm one of 13 kids. I'm like, oh,
Oh,
that
wow.
top that. And her story was that when she was 16, her parents sent masked men to kidnap her and take her to this
Oh my,
therapeutic boarding school where she was, trapped for 2 years.
oh my God.
And she told me all about her experience at the school, and I was just completely shocked and horrified by her stories. So again, like I met with her a few different times, interviewed her, and so got all this background information to use to create my characters, Lisa, Patrick, and Jamie, and their experiences as students at a school like this.
That's
So
so interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So before
And
that conversation, I never would have thought to put that into a book.
right. And you got to be careful on the other side of it is that you're not just shoehorning in interesting experiences into a disparate tale,
That is the challenge. I know. I mean,
right?
often I would, come up with some sort of a set piece, as I like to call it. Like, oh, I
Right.
should insert this into the story somehow.
Right.
And I'll have to just like go for a run and think about like, all right, how on earth is this going to fit into the story? And
Right.
sooner or later, either it goes away or
Right. But I think to your point, like, right, the important thing is getting it in there, just writing it, just getting to the end and then deciding, does this serve the story or not? And because I think we can all, and sometimes it's hard for us to see in our own work, right? You need somebody
Mhm.
else to say like, oh, this scene feels disembodied from the rest
Yeah.
of the piece. Um, but yeah, the most important thing is just getting it in there. But you can always tell when you're reading somebody else's work. And I always think this with research, for example. I'm like, oh, this person found out this really interesting fact and was
Uh-huh.
dying to share it. And it's interesting, but it so stands out and it's not, doesn't move the story along. And that's such a hard thing to gauge because you get all excited about it. And then
Uh-huh.
it's really hard to have the objectivity to say like, does this work? Does this hospital scene work? Is
Mhm.
this necessary? You know?
Yeah. I mean, but that's where your,
Yeah.
developmental editor comes
Well,
in.
and
Right.
probably your journalistic background,
Uh-huh.
I assume, that gave you kind of the legs to to advance your writing mind. You know this. I mean, and that's difficult style of writing, right? It's very pithy and it's very
Mhm.
obviously factually based. And I always see it as very like a huge discipline to be able to write from a journalistic mind.
Mhm.
Do you think that contributed to allowing you just to build that muscle to
Yeah,
explore larger
absolutely.
form writing?
Yeah, definitely. Just, there's a certain way of telling a story where you need to, introduce everything up front and then add your backstory. I mean, it's very different writing. And my writing, I wouldn't say that my writing is particularly journalistic in
Right,
Thorn City by any means, but the organizational skills, being able to do the research, being able to, structure a story in a really logical way where it has a nice, beginning and ends nicely and has all the
right,
stuff in the middle that you need. So, so
right,
yeah, I think it probably definitely helped as far as being able to organize my thoughts into completed chapters. I'm also I'm definitely a plotter, not a pantser.
oh,
I
okay,
um I create really, really elaborate outlines. I do these spreadsheets where I plot out the story and have it all color coded according to which character its
yeah,
perspective is
good
in
for
to make
you.
sure that everybody has enough to say throughout the story to justify them having chapters. Yeah, so
I wish I had that. I just don't have any. My brain just does not work like that.
uh,
And my writing is all based on hunches, which is scary
uh-huh.
because you're just
That's
like, I don't
exciting.
know. Like, I have no idea, but we'll
Hmm.
see. So I always have so much respect for somebody who can just not only see the field from the beginning to the end, which I don't even see the end until like 80% in. I'm like, maybe this happens. I don't know. Um, but then to like, I know people who are like, all right, how much is happening in my act one, my act two, my act three? Like the idea of
Hmm.
like making sure these characters have enough appearance and screen time to warrant their status in your book. That's great. But that's also a lot of work. But then I guess you get to the writing part and you're like, shit, it's already done. I just got to
Yeah,
fill in the
well,
words now.
now I
not,
just made
not to make it too reductive, but I assume it's easier than me who's just sitting there like, I don't know what happens next.
I don't actually, I don't know. I mean, I think, the way Thorn City is structured and the way the sequel will be structured, and everything takes place. It's essentially 2 days. There's 2 days and then a break and then another day. So everything has to happen pretty succinctly, and all of these things are characters are experiencing different things and the same things at the same time, and trying to determine exactly like what someone knows in a particular time frame, it gets really tricky. Like when to expose secrets, when to hide secrets, etc. So, because Thorn City has 9 different character perspectives, and the
Wow.
next, yeah.
Yeah.
So it does take a bit of organization in order to,
Yeah. No,
yeah,
for sure.
put it all together and have it be logical. Whereas if everything's just first person, one character, and you're only seeing things from one person's
Yeah.
perspective, I could see being able to just kind of flow through the story as
Which
a
is how I typically
answer.
write. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's a very skilled, necessary thing to write from the way that you're doing it. Because I've read a lot of books where there are 5+ POVs and
Hmm.
it's not done well. And when I say it's not done well, to me it means it's just confusing. Like I get, and I think I get confused easily anyway. I think it's just who I am. Um, and I was actually just reflecting on this the other day with a student I'm working with. I think people need, I think not all readers, but I think a lot of readers there's a lot of things you don't have to explain to them, and those are the things we typically over explain as writers, I think. Descriptions and things like that, and we're not giving them credit for their own visualization.
Mhm.
But plot wise and POV wise, I do think you have to kind of be fairly clear, maybe more clear than you think is necessary, because
Mhm.
so much resides in your head as the author, and you think it's all there, and it's not. And then all of a sudden, the reader gets 20 pages in, and they're on the third POV, and they're frustrated,
Mhm.
and they've got so many things to occupy their time, namely their smartphone, that
Mhm.
they don't finish the book. So do you get feedback like that when you're dealing with nine, of like people saying, okay, I'm confused here, or this makes sense, or you've overlapped it, where we're always picking up some event that we've already known about to make it easier?
Yeah, it's not, yeah, everything kind of flows into the next thing very
Got it.
rapidly. So
Yeah,
most of the feedback that I've gotten is that people read the book in like a day or two. They
that's
just
great.
whip through it.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, and it's the kind of book that I also like to read. I like multiple perspectives. I like sort of a really fast pace and short time span kind of
right.
stories. So, yeah, I mean, it's my debut. I'm hoping book two will be, better. But yeah, it was a fun way to write the story, writing a scene through one person's perspective and then flipping it right over to how someone else saw it,
Right.
which is completely different from the way that the previous character. So you're seeing all of the same event, but through multiple perspectives, which I just love because
Right.
everybody has an opinion about everything.
Right. And you have a lot of shady characters, and you have a lot of conflict. And when you're writing this, are you thinking like, I'm writing a mystery novel, or, you know,
Hmm.
I met you at ITW, I'm writing a thriller? Did you have that mindset, or like, I'm just writing this story and the publisher is the one who told me what it was?
Yeah, no, the publisher definitely did not tell me how anything was. It's all me. I think honestly, initially, I don't know if I really had planned it to. I knew that there was a murder, yeah. So I knew that it would be a thriller. And I
Yeah.
added additional elements to make it a little bit more
Right.
in that genre.
Right.
Yeah, once it became clear to me. Um, yeah, honestly, when I started taking that class like 10 years ago, I had no idea what I was doing.
Right.
So
Right.
it sort of bubbled up and evolved into.
Yeah. Yeah, it was my agent when I got her
Uh-huh.
who said I'd written a thriller. I'm like, oh, okay. What's
Hmm.
a thriller? What is that exactly?
Okay,
And
I
she's like,
like
I
it.
don't know. Nobody actually knows. There's no real, like, I think you can define a mystery, like a base level mystery. I think that can be very grossly defined. But when you get to thriller, I know it when I see it, kind of a thing. So,
Mhm.
so I assume you go to BoucherCon, and in addition to Thriller Fest, and
I
or
didn't go this, no, I didn't go this year.
yeah.
Maybe in the future I will. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's a worthy investment. It's cheaper than Thriller Fest.
Uh,
It's in New Orleans, I think, in
oh, next
2025.
time?
Yeah, so
Oh, okay. Yeah. We have good friends in New Orleans, and my husband and I were literally just saying, when are we going to go visit them?
put it on your list. It should be
All
in
right.
September or so.
Okay.
Uh, well,
Nice.
Pam, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do our own little storytelling if you're up for it.
Okay.
This is the
Sure.
making it up portion of the show where I've selected three books, mostly at random from my bookshelves. I'm going to have you choose one of those books, and we're going to
Okay.
choose a random sentence from a random page. And I'm going to read that sentence, and that'll be the first sentence in a 2 or 3 minute long short story. So I'll read that sentence. You give me the next sentence or two. I'll do a sentence or two, and then when it goes completely off the rails, I will kill it. So it's fun. It's talk about being vulnerable and letting go.
Oh
Uh,
boy.
I have the lovely Claire McIntosh's Game of Lies.
Okay.
These are all very different books. Ray Bradbury's From the Dust Returned. And then I actually have Matthew McConaughey's memoir, Greenlights, which is really
I
good. I
I
highly
think we got to
recommend it.
go McConaughey.
You got to go McConaughey. All right, so
Made a
we can
terrible
do
choice.
we can do whatever we want with this. Give me a page between 1 and 289.
113.
Okay. Oh, this is a really interesting page. All right. I'm just going to read this sentence,
Okay.
and you do whatever you want with it. It was time for me to become a man.
I went to the big and tall store and picked myself out a charcoal suit with pinstripes.
It fit perfectly, and when the tailor came to do adjustments, we soon found none were necessary. I have to say it was one of the most exciting experiences in my life until I checked the price tag, which read $450, approximately $400 more than what I had on me.
It was at that moment that I knew I was still a boy.
And then I decided the only thing that could really make me a man in this moment was to somehow leave the store wearing this suit, whether or not I paid for it.
And so I took one of their job applications and filled it out. They interviewed me on the spot, gave me a $400 advance, and the suit was mine.
I
I was a
love how
man
you,
again.
I love how you're just trying to make it all moral and nice. Um,
You were going to have him steal the suit.
oh,
That works
100%.
too.
Yeah, you might have to commit murder before he steals it. All right, so he's got a job. He's in there. Everything's great. And it was my second week into the job when a kid from school I recognized, more than recognized, I would use the word hated, walked into the store.
He looked around, went to the counter where where the adorable bow ties were sold, and I saw him swipe one of the ties. What should I do? Should I confront him, this wretched human being who had tortured me in high school, middle school, elementary school, or should I let him get away with it and walk off
All right,
because
I think we call it there because it's a cliffhanger. We don't know what I think he probably chases him down and does something terrible to him and doxes him and
Mhm.
ruins his life over a stolen bow tie. I remember I had that experience where I remember being a senior in high school going in to rent my dumb tux for prom and the guy saying, "Hey, you want to work here?" Like, no.
Did you do it? No.
Well, listen, congrats on Thorn City. That's
Thank
I
you.
remember listening to you at the debut breakfast. I'm like,
Mhm.
that's an interesting sounding person. I
Excellent.
want to talk to that person. So I enjoyed our conversation, and it was great to hear about kind of your process and your journey. And I know, speaking for myself, and I'm sure for the listeners as well, we're excited to see what Thorn City 2 ends up being.
Me too. I'm really looking forward to it. All right,
Awesome.
well,
Thanks for your time, Pam. Great to talk to you.
thank you too.
Bye. So that's it. That is my conversation with Pamela Statz. Her book out is Thorn City. Please check that out. And you can learn anything you want to learn about Pamela at her website, which is simply pamelastatz.com. And you can pop on over to my website, carterwilson.com, and you can read about my upcoming book, my upcoming release, Tell Me What You Did, out January 28th from Poison Pen Press. I'm very excited. I've got some big news to share about this book when I'm allowed to. And you can pop on over to unboundwriter.com if you're interested in one-on-one coaching, online classes, or in-person retreats and workshops. Friends, that is it for now. That is it for this episode of Making It Up. Another episode out just next week. Thank you, as always, for watching and or listening. Take care.